Professor Namyong Lee's commentary, long, the Arctic shipping route as a new opportunity for economic development. If Korea does not decide now, in 10 years, neither the route nor the resources will be left. The new economic map opened by ice is not a shortcut, but a market of rules. The Arctic has become an operational arena where trade, energy, and security overlap, beyond being a mere symbol of climate change. In long-term satellite-based trends, the minimum September Arctic sea ice extent is widely cited as declining by roughly the low teens % per decade, and this change tends to widen the seasonal window in which routes can open. However, the Arctic route is not a year-round highway like southern routes. Even as sea ice decreases, it does not simply disappear. It becomes thinner and more mobile, while freezing conditions, fog, strong winds, and icebergs combine into a highly volatile operating environment. Therefore, competition in the Arctic is decided not by distance, but by delivery reliability and demonstrable safety. Ultimately, the actors who make money in the Arctic are not the countries that merely use a passage for ships, but the countries that supply the integrated system of vessels, operations, safety, data, and insurance that can function in polar conditions. If Korea does not decide now, there is a high likelihood that 10 years from now, standards, contracts, and pricing power will already have hardened into systems controlled by other countries. The characteristics of the three major Arctic routes differ from one another. The Arctic routes are broadly divided into the Northern Sea Route, NSR, the Northwest Passage, NWP, and the Transpolar route, whose feasibility may increase over the longer term. All three share the common feature of being shorter, yet their operational risks and control structures are fundamentally different. The Northern Sea Route is structured to operate on top of Russia's coastal traffic control, permitting and icebreaker support systems. Russia strongly tends to combine icebreaker power with port capacity, traffic control, and search and rescue capabilities in order to make the route a state-managed transport corridor. The Northwest Passage passes through the Canadian Arctic archipelago, where narrow channels, shallow waters, icebergs, and sudden weather changes determine cost. As Canada's sovereignty claims and environmental regulations are added, the issue appears not as a simple matter of route engineering, but as a combined problem of international law, regulation, and insurance. It is still premature to describe the Transpolar route as a commercially established, scheduled route, and it will become realistic only if further sea ice change occurs and safety, search and rescue, and communications infrastructure follow. The current reality must be acknowledged as energy and raw material logistics centered. The present cargo volume on the Northern Sea Route is not driven by regular container services, but by specialized logistics centered on energy and raw materials. In publicly discussed statistics and reporting, the 2024 Northern Sea Route cargo volume is mentioned at around 37.9 million tons, and it is reasonable to interpret this as a flow linked to the export of Arctic energy and minerals. What Korea often expects, Asia-Europe transit, still resembles an auxiliary market rather than the core. The reason 2024 NSR transit cargo is discussed at roughly the 3 million ton level is that the Arctic route has not yet commercialized delivery reliability, insurance, search and rescue, and port infrastructure sufficiently to replace the container main artery merely through distance reduction. The Northwest Passage is similar. Mentions that in a recent year, the number of vessels completing the passage was in the high teens may demonstrate it is possible, but they do not guarantee mass commercialization. At this stage, the Arctic route is structured so that money circulates first, not in scheduled container services, but in LNG transport linked to polar energy projects, bulk raw materials, and project cargo. What must be pioneered is not the route, but the operating system. The first pillar of pioneering is data. Ice forecasting, abrupt weather shifts, freezing and corrosion, equipment failure rates, crew fatigue, and route-specific delay patterns must be accumulated as operational data, and then linked to insurance terms and freight rate structures. When the Automatic Identification System, AIS, satellite observation, and route control data are integrated, the Arctic shifts from an adventure to a manageable risk. The second pillar of pioneering is search and rescue, SRR, and emergency response. In the Arctic, incidents tend to escalate not into mere delays, but into isolation and prolonged rescue operations, and the longer the rescue gap, the worse the insurance underwriting conditions become, and the more likely shippers are to leave. If Korea is to pioneer the route, it must present not only operations, but also incident response systems as part of a contractual package. The third pillar of pioneering is the structure of insurance, reinsurance, and contracts. In the Arctic, capital expenditure, CAPEX, and operating expenditure, OPEX, are large in absolute terms, and in an accident losses can spread across vessels, cargo, the environment, delays, and reputation. Therefore, Korea should design an insurable route by standardizing Arctic-specific insurance products, reinsurance pools, and exemption clauses. The fourth pillar of pioneering is ports, maintenance, fuel, and communications. Delivery reliability improves only when Arctic ports of call have adequate handling capacity, low-temperature fuel and lubricant supply, remote maintenance and spare parts supply chains, and countermeasures for satellite communications shadow zones. The contest over Arctic routes is ultimately a contest over operational quality, and operational quality is built through an infrastructure package. The geopolitical dynamics among stakeholder countries are a competition not over the path, but over control rights. Russia's view is clear. It sees the Northern Sea route as an artery of national growth strategy and Arctic resource development, and it seeks to make it a de facto gateway by combining permits, traffic control, ice-breaking, fees, and ports. Russia is discussed as having an aggressive target of expanding NSR cargo volume into the 200 million ton range by the mid-2030s, and this signals that it views the Arctic not as a simple route, but as a national logistics industry. China's view is calculative. The Arctic is both an access route for energy and minerals and a detour for supply chains, while also being an arena where sanctions, insurance, and settlement risks are evaluated numerically, and speed is adjusted accordingly. China holds ammunition in the form of cargo, capital, and shipbuilding demand, yet it is likely to approach the Arctic by distributing risk across multiple routes, rather than betting everything on one shot. The view of the United States and its allies centers on rules and security. Because Arctic routes connect to military access, surveillance, communications, and seabed infrastructure, they are not treated as mere logistics projects. The United States shows a tendency to lead rule competition in the Arctic around the principle of freedom of navigation and safety and environmental standards, and there also exists a perspective that is wary of expanded Russia-China cooperation. Canada's view centers on sovereignty and control. Regarding the Northwest Passage, Canada has maintained a strong position that it is within Canadian waters, and as commercialization advances, reporting, environmental and safety regulations may become stricter. Europe's view centers on environment and sustainability. In an era when standards for black carbon, pollution and ecosystem protection are translated into investment and procurement criteria, Europe is likely to view the Arctic as a market judged by regulation. Nordic countries tend to believe that on-the-ground safety and SAR capability determine the fate of routes, and they hold a realism that a single accident can undermine trust in the entire market. Korea's shipbuilding capability is indeed the core lever for pioneering Arctic routes. Korea is strong in the Arctic because its shipbuilding industry has experience actually executing the highest difficulty of commercial polar operations, cases in which multiple R-7 class ice-breaking liquefied natural gas LNG carriers deployed to Russia's Yamal LNG project were built by Korean shipyards and operated mean that Korea possesses proven performance connecting design, build, delivery, real-world operation. In addition, in the liquefied natural gas (LNG) carrier market, Korea has maintained global competitiveness through technical difficulty and delivery reliability. As the globally discussed LNG fleet grows into the 700-plus range as of the end of 2023, for example, around 722 vessels, expanding LNG trade leads directly to demand for high-value ships. The core of the Arctic is the combination of ice-class rating plus gas transport, and this combination creates a very high barrier to entry. Therefore, Korean shipbuilding is not merely an industry that sells ships, but an industry that supplies essential infrastructure enabling Arctic routes. If this lever is bundled into national strategy, Korea can secure bargaining power as a system supplier rather than remaining a user nation that pays tolls. However, technology alone is not enough. If contracts collapse and disputes occur under a sanctions environment, profits can disappear even with superior ship technology. Korea's shipbuilding competitiveness becomes national competitiveness only when it is integrated with sanctions-resilient contracts, insurance, finance, and legal structures. Korea's government strategy should be integrated governance, sanctions resilience, and rule preemption. First, the government must bind the Arctic route not as a single ministry project, but as a national operating model. If diplomacy, maritime affairs, industry, defense, science and technology, finance, insurance, and the environment all move separately, pilot voyages will end as events and will not become commercial services. Since the Arctic is a networked market, weak coordination forces Korea to absorb costs belatedly. Second, a sanctions-resilient approach is necessary. The Northern Sea route has structures of control, permits, services, and fees, and transactions are intertwined with settlement, insurance, equipment, and technology controls. The government should not merely tell companies to go, but should provide a standard risk framework on what transaction structures can be sustained legally, what insurance and reinsurance combinations are possible, and what technologies and equipment carry control risks. Third, rules must be preempted. The International Maritime Organization, IMO's Polar Code, already operates as a mandatory regime, and environmental emissions and pollution regulations are likely to become more stringent. The government should support Korean shipbuilding and shipping to productize additional safety evidence beyond basic compliance, thereby enabling Korea to present first the conditions demanded by shippers and insurers. Fourth, a port state strategy is required. Korea is a country commonly assessed as having high trade dependence, and Busan is a world-class transshipment hub, with recent year container throughput discussed at around the mid-20 million TEU range. The government should design policy to elevate Busan beyond transshipment into an Arctic-linked hub for insurance, finance, maintenance, and data. The strategy for Korean companies should not be winning ship orders, but supplying the polar logistics operating system. Shipping companies should not run a pilot once and stop, but should first define cargo groups and seasonal windows, and then prove delivery reliability numerically. When service level agreements, SLA, are designed to fit Arctic realities and data-based freight structures, provide shippers with predictable risk, the market will attach. Shipbuilders should sell operational packages beyond ice-class construction, hull and propulsion reliability, freezing and corrosion management, remote condition monitoring, spare parts and maintenance networks, crew training and classification and insurance documentation should be bundled into a single product. Because contracts collapse when accidents occur in the Arctic, shipbuilding that sells safety evidence together is true competitiveness. Finance and insurance should build Arctic-specific products. Because Arctic operations are risky, pricing risk accurately can actually open the market. If reinsurance pools underwriting criteria based on route, vessel, crew, weather and ice data, and liability allocation structures for environmental damage are designed, Korea can leap from being a shipbuilding powerhouse to becoming a maritime finance powerhouse. Information and communications as well as satellite and data companies should enter together. In the Arctic, communications gaps and route forecasting become direct costs, so satellite communications, navigation, sea ice forecasting, and digital traffic control technologies are a major axis of competitiveness. When Korea supplies digital operating systems that can integrate with shipbuilding, it can transform Arctic routes from a business of using roads built by others into a market where our systems are embedded. Korea's shipbuilding capability is not a sufficient condition, but the lever of victory. The Arctic route is still a limited commercial market centered on energy and raw materials rather than a scheduled container main artery. Even so, the flow in which NSR cargo is discussed in the high 30 million ton range and transit in the around 3 million ton range signals that the Arctic has entered a zone that is not impossible but monetizable through operational design. Russia seeks to own the route through control rights and infrastructure, China seeks practical gains through cargo and capital, and the United States, Canada, and Europe seek to draw the boundary of the market through security, sovereignty, and environmental rules. In this network, Korea survives by becoming not a simple user nation, but a system supplying nation. Korea's world-leading shipbuilding capability is clearly a core competitiveness in pioneering Arctic routes. However, for that competitiveness to become a national growth engine, shipbuilding technology must be combined with sanctions-resilient contracts, insurance, finance, data, search and rescue, and port infrastructure, and exported as a polar logistics operating system. If Korea decides now, 10 years from now, Korea can become not a nation that uses the route, but a nation that enables the route. Thank you for watching Professor Namyong Lee's commentary, Long.